Hello again, happy readers. Corinne Smith here, this time talking about books on the theme of walking. Because I looked at my bookshelves and I realized that I had a lot of titles that I could show you and could talk about. Why is this? Why do I have so many books on this topic? Well, let's go back in time to 1973. To the summer before my junior year of high school, and that's when our senior Girl Scout troop hiked for pretty much a whole week. I'm not exactly sure how many days, 3, 4, 5 days, along the C&O Canal, the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal, along the Potomac River. We walked from Harper's Ferry to 15 miles outside of Washington, D.C. to get to the Rockwood National Girl Scout Camp, which operated at that time. No longer in existence. Sorry about that. And here is my proof. Here is my patch jacket. Here's my patch jacket from that time. And some of these patches come from that time. And here's the C&O Canal patch with the little segment that we did. Was run by the Boy Scouts at the time. Not sure if that still is. Anyway, we hiked, and we had done practice hikes on parts of the Horseshoe Trail and the Appalachian Trail in southeastern Pennsylvania, where we were from. These were very cool experiences, and to me, they made hiking anywhere possible. Even maybe the whole length of the Appalachian Trail, if need be, someday, since it was so close to us. It was a dream. It was a dream. So, that was 1973. 2 months later, a guy named Peter Jenkins started walking south from upstate New York. He would eventually reach New Orleans in the spring of 1975. There, he took on a partner, and together they headed west and reached Oregon in 1979. Map. I love maps. I've told you that before. So when Peter Jenkins wrote about all of this in A Walk Across America and The Walk West, A Walk Across America 2, we were all captivated, okay? He captured our imaginations. Remember, these were the days when Charles Kuralt would show us small town America on the On the Road episodes on CBS, and William Least Moon was showing us blue highways, doing something similar in his book. Now, Charles and William were behind a wheel for their explorations and adventures, and they were great. But if you are on foot, you get to see and hear much more. More about the people, more about the landscape, much more. So, this is what we're going to explore today. Stories from people who have walked somewhere. They will talk about their experiences, about the good people they met, about the natural landscapes they saw along the way. Some of these walks are tough hikes. Some are pilgrimages. Some have themes. At least one of them is rather odd. There are many more books about walking than what I'm going to show you today. These are ones that I have read, and most of them I still own. I am sticking mostly to North America here. So if you have more favorites that I don't mention, please share them below in the comments section. I am always ready to hear about more and to read more. You know, maybe it's easier to read about people walking long distances than it is to actually walk those distances yourself. Because now I do hike in local parks and along old rail trails. I never did through hike the Appalachian Trail. Oh well. Now, since I am a big fan of Henry David Thoreau, I have to start with his essay, Walking. Although he worked on writing this essay during the 1850s and sometimes lectured on the topic, this essay wasn't published officially in the Atlantic Monthly magazine until 1862, just after Henry had died. This is a general approach to the concept of walking as Thoreau saw it. He often sees it with humor, as usual. For more specific walks for him, you can read his essays A Walk to Wachusett or A Winter Walk, as well as his collections of writings about his times on Cape Cod and in the Maine woods, and just about any part of his journal. So you get a lot to choose from if you start with Thoreau, as usual. And then classically also we have 1,000-Mile Walk to the Gulf by John Muir, which he did in 1867. You probably associate John Muir with Yosemite and with the Sierra Mountains in California and with exploring the glaciers of Alaska. But before he did all of that, in 1867, he walked from Indianapolis, Indiana, to Cedar Keys in Florida, where his original plans took a major change, and it changed the trajectory of the rest of his life. You will have to read about it here or read any Muir biography to find out more if you don't know about that story. By the way, this edition has a foreword by Peter Jenkins, A Walk Across America. Okay, now about 10 years ago, I met an environmental educator in Michigan who told me that he and his wife had reenacted the 1,000-Mile Walk to the Gulf from Indiana to Florida. And I immediately asked if they had written about it, and he said no. And I encouraged him to write about it. I said, people will want to know. I hope you do. So, if you're in the environmental ed field in Michigan and this story sounds familiar, please let me know if he wrote it. I don't remember his name. I think readers would be very interested in hearing about that kind of adventure, don't you? Or maybe one of you guys did the 1,000-Mile Walk. Let us know, okay? Let us know. Before we go too much farther here, let's go to a general book on the topic, and that is On Trails by Robert Moor, M-O-O-R, came out in 2016. Robert explores the idea of what paths and trails really are and why we follow them. Actually, I think this is the book that talks about the difference between a path and a trail. We tend to use those words interchangeably, but really, a path is what you follow, and a trail is what you leave behind. Of course it is. If you thought about it, yes, of course. Robert hiked the Appalachian Trail in 2009, but that's only part of his story. He talks about a lot of different kinds of trails that he has taken in a variety of places and not just in North America. And it's a good overview of hiking and trail mystique. So that's On Trails by Robert Moor. I have it in hardback. It's also available in paperback. Here is an old collection of essays called The Pleasures of Walking, edited by Edwin Valentine Mitchell. Originally came out in 1934. This copy dates to 1948. There are 13 essays in here from a variety of people, including 2 by Charles Dickens, 1 by Christopher Morley, 1 by Hilaire Belloc. Thoreau's essay Walking is in here, so this is an interesting little smorgasbord of short pieces on the theory of the subject. Now, again, before we get too far along here, we should stop and talk about the biggest walks that probably come to mind. I'm talking first about the AT, the Appalachian Trail. It stretches for more than 2,000 miles from Georgia to Maine. Fair number of people, dedicated people, through hike it every year, and that's how they do it. They start in spring on Springer Mountain in Georgia, and they go north to Mount Katahdin in Maine. Yes, so some of these folks write about their experiences. I have read a lot of AT memoirs, a lot. I used to have a whole bookshelf about the AT, filled with dozens of books. A lot of them were stories from through hikers. Vicariously, I still thought that maybe I could do that someday myself. Obviously not. First of all, I've never had 6 months free when I could dedicate myself to the task. And quite frankly, second, since I am reluctant to go in the woods, my walking options are limited to places where there are outhouses or nearby convenience stores with public restrooms. By the way, the C&O Canal had a couple of outhouses along the way when we did it in 1973. So, a few years ago, I met a young person who was going to head down to Georgia in the spring, and he was going to start walking north. And I offed almost all my AT books off on him. I don't know if he even looked at them. I know that he did do a good chunk of the southern portion of the trail, and somehow didn't finish it. I'm going to reconnect with him sometime this year and ask him for more details. Nevertheless, that material went to a more appropriate home than mine. Sometimes you just have to face your own truth, you know. Now, the casual tale that most people know about the AT is this one, which I'm not even going to name because the author and his high school friend weren't really too dedicated to the task. They weren't really prepared. They didn't really do the whole AT. They walked sometime before 1998 because that's when this book came out. And this book has a love-hate relationship with a lot of the hiking community and the people associated with the AT, especially after the movie was made. I could make a whole video just on that issue alone, so let's just say this is the book that most people know. I certainly cannot prevent you from reading it. It's okay, but there are better ones out there. Let me recommend a few of them. First of all, I'm going to recommend Grandma Gatewood's Walk, the inspiring story of the woman who saved the Appalachian Trail by Ben Montgomery. I ordered a library copy and it didn't come in time for me to record the video. Sorry, it's a paper front cover. So Emma Gatewood lived in Ohio, and she was suffering from an abusive relationship with her husband. And in 1955, she started walking, and she eventually ended up, she left home, left her husband and kids, left home. She was in her late 60s, ended up on the Appalachian Trail with very little to carry, except like what you see here, and relied on a lot of people along the way to help her out. How she managed to do the whole trail, which wasn't even really completed yet, and be the first person to hike the whole length of it, it's just a fascinating story. And Ben includes details in here about how the AT even came to exist. So Grandma Gatewood's Walk is a good one. My favorite personal AT memoir is In Beauty May She Walk, Hiking the Appalachian Trail at 60 by Leslie Moss. Leslie hiked the whole trail in sections, not continuously, and she did this during the year 2001. And after September 11th of that year, her project took on a whole different nuance. I think this is one of the best contemporary AT memoirs out there, and I was not in her age range when I read it. I am in the middle of reading this one now, Hiking Through One Man's Journey to Peace and Freedom on the Appalachian Trail by Paul Stutzman. I just picked it up at the public library book sale last week, and there it is. I got to read it. In 2008, Paul decided to hike the AT to help him go through the grieving process after he lost his wife to cancer. Paul was also from Ohio, and he has Amish and Mennonite roots, so it's a really interesting story. And I'm only about a third through it. I like this one too. Hiking Through. Now, the other big trail and the big book that most people will know is Wild, From Lost to Found on the Pacific Crest Trail by Cheryl Strayed. This book came out in 2012, but Cheryl was actually writing it from her journals and from memory because she hiked the Pacific Crest Trail in 1995, I think. She was also dealing with grief and with other challenges, so it seemed to be the perfect time to head for the hills. The Pacific Crest Trail, the PCT, runs from the Mexican border to the Canadian border, more than 1,000 miles, goes through follows the Sierra Nevada and the Cascade ranges of mountains. Cheryl did most of the middle of it. I listened to this book on CD. I was a little disappointed that Cheryl didn't read it herself, But the adventure was still interesting and compelling, entertaining. I've never seen the movie. Most of you probably have. This book has a memorable and perfect cover for it, doesn't it? I'll bet you that's what helped it become a bestseller, you know? So yeah, Wild by Cheryl Strayed. Now, I would say if you have to choose between the two most popular books about trails, I would choose this one. Let's walk on with more stories from other folks and other kinds of hikes, and we are going to approach these in chronological order. How about The Man Who Walked Backward, An American Dreamer's Search for Meaning in the Great Depression. This one's also by Ben Montgomery, who wrote Grandma Gatewood's Walk. If you know anything about American history and culture, you know that the 1920s and 1930s had some crazy times of people doing crazy, daring things. There were dancing marathons, people were sitting on flagpoles, people were eating goldfish for some reason. You had Charles Lindbergh crossing the Atlantic by himself. You had Babe Ruth pitching and hitting like no one else ever had. And then when the Great Depression hit, there was an even greater interest in people who were doing crazy and daring things to get people's minds off of their own troubles. So in Abilene, Texas, Plenty Wingo lost his business, and then he tried to figure out something to do and something to raise money, and he somehow hit on the goal of walking backward around the world. So in 1931, he set out from Fort Worth, Texas, and he walked backward to New York City. He did get to Europe and to parts of Asia and eventually back to Los Angeles and back to Texas the following year in 1932. Not exactly all around the world on foot, but reasonably close. This is an odd and interesting story, all at one time. And you learn more about what life was like back in the 1930s. And then we have Peace Pilgrim. Have you ever heard of Peace Pilgrim? She's a woman who walked all over the United States from 1953 until her death in 1981 with just the clothes on her back. She walked thousands upon thousands of miles, no food, no money, no extra supplies with her, no car following her along the way. She was armed simply with a lot of faith and a mission of peace. After she died, some of her friends compiled her writings into this book. I know someone who once spotted Peace Pilgrim walking through the streets of Worcester, Massachusetts back in maybe the 60s or 70s. Maybe you know somebody who had caught a glimpse of Peace Pilgrim walking along the road. Kind of wish we had a Peace Pilgrim these days. Actually, we could probably use more than one. There you go. There's a project for you. All right, how about we cross the Atlantic and go with The Last of the Donkey Pilgrims, A Man's Journey Through Ireland by Kevin O'Hara. Kevin is from the United States. This book came out in 2004, but actually it was 1979 when Kevin needed to work through some challenges, and that's when he decided to go back to the land of his ancestors, Ireland, and that's when he decided to walk the 1,800-mile coastline accompanied by a donkey named Missy. Actually, I can't even remember if I read all of this book. I know I saw Kevin do a program here in Massachusetts. He lives in Western Massachusetts. So I may have to go back and read this one again, The Last of the Donkey Pilgrims. Now, if you are a walker yourself, you know the truth of what I'm going to say. The act of walking is therapeutic in a variety of ways. It gives your body something specific to do, while your mind can work through other things if it wants to. It can be receptive to what's going on, or it can, work through some things. It gives you time and the soothing habit of repetitive motion to encourage lots of thinking. Moving on. One of my favorite nature books is The Path by Chet Raymo. I think you can consider it a walking book too. It came out in 2003, and for more than 30 years, Chet Raymo was a physics professor at Stonehill College in Easton, Massachusetts, and he lived just 1 mile from the campus. So day after day, he walked from home to his office along this path, along this 1 mile piece of landscape, through the trees, through the woods, near a brook, near a meadow, past a rocky foundation of a previous building, over and over again. And he grew curious about where he was walking and what he was seeing every day. And he started studying this 1 mile piece of landscape intently, intensely too. The town's history, its geology, why everything was this way, all of it. This is place-based education before we really had a name for it like that. This is also a lesson in close observation and paying attention to your surroundings. So, if you can't do the AT or the PCT, and if you are not inclined to walk across America, forward or backward, you can at least walk 1 mile of your neighborhood to see and to understand what really lies there. I love this book. I love this concept. I do wish I had a copy that had a dust jacket. That's The Path by Chet Raymo. Next up is another book I picked up at the public library book sale last week, which was a good one. Walking the Trail, One Man's Journey Along the Cherokee Trail of Tears by Jerry Ellis. Jerry has Cherokee heritage and is from Alabama. And in 1989, he decided to walk from Oklahoma to Alabama backwards in a, he's walking forward, but in a reverse journey of the terrible Trail of Tears that the Native Americans were forced to make in the 1830s. He aimed to see if he could find spiritual remnants of that awful time along the route. He wanted to honor his people and himself, and along the way he gathered special mementos so he could have a ceremony at the end of his journey where the march started. So you learn a lot of forgotten history here, especially if you're not Native American. Jerry has written a couple more books about other walks that he has taken. This is the only one I've read so far, and I really enjoyed it. It's very enlightening. Walking the Trail. We may want to check out Jerry Ellis's other books too. Next is, we have Walking Towards Walden, A Pilgrimage in Search of Place by John Hanson Mitchell. John is also an author who is into close observation, paying attention to his nearby landscape. John lives in Littleton, Massachusetts, about 15 miles northwest of Concord. Concord, of course, played a key role in the American Revolution in 1775, was also the home to famous authors like Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, Louisa May Alcott, Nathaniel Hawthorne, some others. Walden Pond lies in Concord, and so John and a few of his friends decided to walk the 15 miles in 1994 from Littleton to Concord. Along the way, they also pay homage to the Native Americans who lived there for a long time in that area, in the Neshoba area. And then, of course, to the colonials, the Minutemen who were called to fight against the British regulars in April 1775. And these walkers consider the people and the landscape and everything that historically they're passing along the way. So that's called Walking Towards Walden by John Hanson Mitchell. Next, there's more. Just keeps on going. Walking to Vermont from Times Square into the Green Mountains, a Homeward Adventure by Christopher S. Wren. Christopher had been a long-time reporter and editor for the New York Times, and so when he decided to retire to his vacation home in Vermont in 2004, he took that opportunity to walk into retirement from Manhattan to Fairleigh, Vermont. And along the way, he hits part of the Appalachian Trail and part of the Long Trail in Vermont. What a way to celebrate a new portion of your life, right? Walking into retirement, walking to Vermont, done in 2004. Staying in New England, we have Walking to Wachusett, a reenactment of Henry David Thoreau's Walk to Wachusett by Robert M. Young. Bob's a good friend of mine. Thank you, Bob. In 2005, he decided to reenact Thoreau's 33-mile walk from Concord to Mount Wachusett, the highest mountain in central Massachusetts, which Thoreau did in 1842. So Bob had to figure out which of today's roads existed then and what routes Thoreau would have taken based on what he said in his essay. It's good historical research, and he did it doing it. Okay, Walking to Wachusett by Bob. Thank you, Bob. Moving to the middle of the country, how about a 1,000-mile walk on the beach, one woman's trek of the perimeter of Lake Michigan by Loreen Niewenhuis. I knew I was going to get that wrong. Niewenhuis. Loreen was married and was a mother of 2 boys when she decided in her 40s that she needed to walk all the way around Lake Michigan. So she started in Chicago one day in March of 2009, went counterclockwise around Lake Michigan, through Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, and back to Illinois. A 1,000-mile walk on the beach. And hey, if you can walk along Lake Michigan, what about going full circle, a 1,555-mile walk around the world's largest lake by Mike Link and Kate Crowley. In 2010, the year after Loreen made her walk around Lake Michigan, Mike and Kate walked around Lake Superior, also counterclockwise, starting in Duluth, Minnesota, and passing through Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Ontario. I know that Mike and Kate had also intended to next walk up and down the course of the Mississippi River. I have a feeling that recent events in the past couple of years prevented them from doing that. If anybody knows if they did it or has more information about Mike and Kate, let me know in the comments below. Going full circle. Okay, so we've gone around Lake Michigan, gone around Lake Superior. Now for a different kind of hiking, I'm suggesting up, a mother and daughter's peak bagging adventure by Patricia, Ellis, Herr. Go back to New England here, and specifically to New Hampshire. I don't have a map to show you on this one, but in New Hampshire there are 48 mountains that stand more than 4,000 feet tall. If you bag all of them, you can become a member of the 4,000 Footer Club. And so Patricia and her older daughter Alexa aim to do their best to reach the tops of all 48. Sounds cool. They started this project in 2008. Alex was only 5 years old, but she was a very energetic 5-year-old. And so the Herrs meet their 48 peak goal 3 years later in 2011. Good for you guys. That's up. Mother and daughter's peak bagging adventure. Let's head west with Trespassing Across America, one man's epic, never done before and sort of illegal hike across the heartland by Ken Ilgunas. Ken is a curious guy. In 2012, he decided to follow the proposed route of the Keystone XL pipeline from Alberta to Texas to see what there was to see the impacts that pipeline would have on people and resources. This one can get hairy. I've met Ken. He's a great guy. Good writer too. Trespassing Across America. And my last recommendation is Walking Home by Lynda L. Wilson of Ontario. In 2014, she and her husband Doug were working through some challenges, and they decided to trace the rail trail, the new rail trail from Guelph to Godric, Ontario. It was only 127 kilometers, which is 79 miles. Doesn't sound like much, but they were passing through farmland and towns, and it was a brand new trail that hadn't really opened yet. And I've driven along that, but I wanted to read how people walked it. Running out of time here. I'm tired. Walking. Anyway, there you go. About 24 books to get you started. Do you know more? Please write the comments below if you do. Thank you for joining me. As usual, I'm Corinne Smith. Now go out and take a walk on your own before you pick up one of these great books.